Welcome back to another episode of Lost in the Farmer's Market Garden Shorts. Today, I present you a long-form video called A Tale of Two Asters. Now, I want to start off by saying that most people do not realize that the aster family is very significant in horticulture because it is a massive family that produces a lot of stuff we like. As you can see, that bumblebee or carpenter bee is going to town on this particular aster. They bring in pollinators, and then their seeds are preferred food of certain birds. So there's two factors to every aster, which is a bonus. Now, asters used to be called, the aster family, which is currently called Asteraceae, used to be called Compositae. That refers to the structure of the flower. The petals aren't actually the flower. They're the attracting sort of landing pad for pollinators. The flower is the cluster in the middle, which is actually comprised of dozens of actual tube flowers compressed onto each other in a composite fashion, sort of like a compound eye on a bug. Now, speaking of the family's size, you are very familiar with asters, you just don't know it yet. Now, everybody knows sunflowers. They're an aster. And some of you have heard of Jerusalem artichokes. They're in the sunflower family, therefore an aster. You know dandelions, which are definitely an aster. But did you know chicory is an aster? And when you go to the salad aisle, lettuce is an aster. Frisee, radicchio, endive, all asters. Oh, it gets better. Not counting the two plants we're talking about today. You also have crazy interesting things that are asters, like marigolds. All asters. We knew Shasta daisies would count. In fact, the plant we get a botanical pesticide, pyrethrum, comes from the pyrethrum daisy, which is an interestingly dynamic family of asters, which also includes tansy, painted daisy, and a few other things. In short, in most garden scenarios, you're not that far from a daisy family relative. They're actually rivaling the mints in usefulness. But I digress. Let's get on topic today. What you see before you is a Cheyenne spirit coneflower. The scientific name for that species is Echinacea purpurea. Now, echinacea is derived from the Greek word for a sea urchin, and the specific spelling means spiny one, which refers to the slightly bristly foliage. The stems have rigid hairs and bristles and there are bristles on the leaves. It gives it a sort of sandpapery feel. Purpurea means reddish purple. Now, I know the common name for Echinacea purpurea is purple coneflower, but as you can see in Cheyenne spirit, it clearly isn't actually purple. What I wouldn't give for a true fabulous purple coneflower, though. One that would make Prince squeal straight from the grave. That would be lovely. Well, there are a bunch of varieties, and I'm going to take you around the garden so you can see them. Now, not all of them are in bloom, unfortunately, because the coneflowers do as they please, and they get a free license for me to do that. But over here, that is a white swan, the variety. White swan is an Echinacea purpurea that just isn't purple. And these ones about to bloom are green twister. They have green inflections on pink petals that are twisted, which is pretty crazy sounding when you think about it. In there is also powwow white and powwow wild berry, and we're going to see some of those in a moment. Now over here, we have a cluster of coneflower. These, and that big cluster, more likely than not, are purple magnus, also Echinacea purpurea. When they bloom, they'll be fabulous, but they're working their way up to it. Over here, and we're going to be doing a lot of walking today, folks. Look at that. That is pale coneflower. Crazy, huh? That's just the flower part, of course. Oh, hey. Our coneflower patch decided to cooperate today for this filming. Wonderful. Now that's a mixture of coneflowers Probably powwow wow berry, probably some purple magnus, maybe some white swan. The problem with coneflowers is you never know what they are unless you label them until they bloom. They all look identical when you're talking Echinacea purpurea. They're legitimately indistinguishable. So what you usually do is you go out with tags like a mad lad the moment they bloom, and you go, that's a that, that's a that. Like, for instance, let's go over here. That is a Cheyenne spirit down there. Right there. And unfortunately, it's not as epic as the ones out in the sun, and that tells me that it's probably not too happy with its placement. We'll see what we can do about that later. In here is Echinacea angustifolia, or narrow-leaf coneflower. That's the one they make the medicines out of. Its flowers are a pale lilac kind of color, so it's obviously not a purple coneflower, but it gets more interesting than that. This little sprout here is Echinacea paradoxa, or yellow coneflower. Now that's an interesting coneflower because it is, I theorize, and there are some blogs that also theorize this, that it is the transitional coneflower between the second aster species I'll be talking about today. Over here is Echinacea tennesseeensis, or Tennessee coneflower. Now, this is critically endangered in Tennessee. It's limited to a very small range, and if you should buy these, make sure your grower is on the straight and narrow for acquiring them. Illegal harvesting is bad, folks. Though, in some cases, it does keep a species from going extinct, as was seen with aloe veras, which are no longer growing in their endemic range because of over-harvesting. It doesn't always work out. All you need to do is look up the story of cycads and how badly they've been treated. But that's a story for another day also. Now, it is theorized by some that Echinacea paradoxa is the bridging point between two different species, and the first specimen of that species is right here before you. This thing with the crazy foliage is a Rudbeckia laciniata, a cutleaf coneflower. Laciniata meaning lacerated or torn up. As you can see, the leaves look like they've been beaten up, but that's just normally how they look. Now this coneflower since it's called cutleaf coneflower, is endemic to the United States. It's found growing in clumps naturally by stream beds in North Carolina. In fact, I found mine as a weed, quote unquote, at the Cape Fear Botanical Gardens when I was interning there, and they were throwing out clumps of it, and I rescued one, and this is it. This plant likes it moist, so it'll tolerate stream bed, riverbanks and whatnot, but it'll do just fine in the garden, and it's fairly rare. Why? I don't know. Who doesn't like a daisy that does well with minimal management? And considering that it can get anywhere from 4 to 8 feet high, depending on its growing conditions, again, why not? That it has a not-so-showy bloom isn't really all that big of a deal. Now I'm going to move on to our next subject, since we're on Rudbeckias. And here we have Rudbeckia maxima. Now I don't quite know what happened to the flower buds. I'm assuming that it got too hot for them. I'm hoping that I get a rebud later. But Rudbeckia maxima is giant coneflower. If you've ever seen the flowers, they are definitely cone-shaped. Their petals aren't too great, and they're not very showy, but the fact that it's a giant coneflower, and look at that foliage. I mean, grayish, green, gray, glaucous. There's many adjectives I could use, but the point is, there's nothing like it. Now over here, and although they're very small and they're slowly growing in, we have Rudbeckia triloba. Triloba meaning three-lobed, and as you look at this leaf here, you can see how it got that name. That variety is Prairie Fire, and as I understand it, they're a beautiful mix. The petals will have a tip of yellow, and they'll be orangey red. Now, about Rudbeckias. Rudbeckias were named by Linnaeus himself to honor his friend Olaf Rudbeck. Now that's an interesting story, because a lot of these plants are often named for people who supposedly discovered them, even though indigenous populations already knew about them. Rudbeckias are indigenous to the United States, or the Americas I should say. And so, again, as a daisy, you're never far from seeing one. Now, how about this one? Not so much the lilies in the back, though those are glorious. This variety is Rudbeckia hirta. Hirta meaning hairy. This variety is Irish eyes, and it's called that because of the green center cone, which, if you turn it sideways, it's definitely cone-shaped. Now, Rudbeckia hirta is commonly known as Gloriosa daisy, and with a flower like that, they sure are. This is another one. I don't quite know what its flower is doing, and until it unfurls, I will not precisely know if it's the same species. I don't care. It's a Rudbeckia hirta. I'm just glad to have it. Now here's the curveball. Coneflowers and Rudbeckias can cross. Pardon me. They produce a crossbreed called Echinacea. Echinacea. Yeah, I went there. Echinacea is sterile. So it's sort of like when a horse and a donkey cross. They produce a mule, a sterile hybrid. And then that sterile hybrid has to be propagated through divisions or cuttings or further crosses in which you put the plants next to each other in the nursery and play Barry White music. Unfortunately, since they do not produce viable seed, that's bad for wild bird populations, though they do produce pollen and all that stuff. So, I mean, the pollinators get something out of it. It's a 50-50 split. They're really cool looking, but they're not long-lived perennials, unfortunately. Now, here's a final note. The common name of Rudbeckias is Black-Eyed Susan. Well, Black-Eyed Susan derives its name from an English poem by John Gay called Black-Eyed Susan. This poem also may have given the name to another flower in the carnation family called Sweet William. That's a dianthus. It's funny how that works out. Now, Black-Eyed Susans, as I said, are called that because the central cone, as is seen in Irish eyes, is completely black, or sometimes brown, which leads to the other name, Brown-Eyed Susan. A lot of folks these days think Black-Eyed Susan has something to do with domestic violence. Not the case, clearly. A little research will do miracles for you. But I'm going to leave you on... Oh, wait. Do y'all see that? That is a mason bee. Now, mason bees are critically important to pollination efforts. They do more pollinating than honeybees do. Remember, folks, plant flowers. Support your local pollinators. Pollinator lives matter, folks. With that said, and I think I'm out of interesting facts for the Tale of Two Daisies, keep them growing, like and subscribe. If you want to hear any specific plants talked about, suggest them in the comments section, hit up the blog, and if I see you at the market, I see you at the market. As always, folks, keep them growing.